according to UNICEF, the United Nations Children's and Education Foundation, says that Gaza is the most dangerous place to be, the most dangerous place in the world for a child at the moment. More than 70% of those who've been killed in Gaza are women and children, but it's not just the physical injuries and death that children are experiencing. What happens to children who survive, those who've lost entire families and are forced to live with the lasting scars? Steve Sosebee is the founder and former director of the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. He's currently heading up the Health and Education and Aid and Leadership Program. He joins me now on the line. Good morning, Steve. Thank you so much. Of course, what is needed at the moment is an immediate ceasefire. It's also the requirement of food, water, humanitarian aid. But talk to us a little bit of the impact of the so far 4-month-long war and its impact on children in Gaza. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Lester. Thank you for having me. First, before I start, I would like to give a special thanks to all of the listeners in South Africa and to the people of South Africa for the stance you've taken on the issue of genocide and bringing this to the World Court, the International Court of Justice. This was a very important gesture, especially coming from South Africa. And we'd like to acknowledge and thank you for that important moral stance and legal stance. So thank you so much. To answer your question, of course, what is the hidden scars that are often unseen when you are able to observe the impact of violence on a population is the trauma and the psychological trauma that is imposed upon the population. So in Gaza, you have 1 million children. And just briefly, let's talk a little bit about what they've gone through in the last 4 months. That 1 million children in Gaza have suffered 1% deaths as a result of bombings and of their schools, bombings of their homes, bombings of hospitals, of mosques, of churches, wherever they're seeking refuge. There are no safe places for these children. Over 10,000, 1% of them have been killed. In addition to that, over 30,000 have suffered significant physical injuries, which will require long-term reconstructive surgery. Some of them are permanent injuries, such as thousands of amputees and children who are in wheelchairs and suffering injuries that they will never be able to recover from for the rest of their life. And then you have, of course, the issue of hunger. Now that we have starvation in Gaza as a result of a political decision to deny food into the Gaza Strip. There are literally hundreds of trucks across the Egyptian border waiting to feed hundreds of thousands of children, and those trucks are denied access to this population of starving children. So this is a political decision. You add to this so many other factors: the lack of clean water, that 85% of the population are displaced, living in shelters during the winter months, and so on and so forth. You add all that together, it's an absolute humanitarian crisis. It's genocide, as your country is clearly represented to the world court. But how does that impact the minds and the hearts of these innocent 1 million children? Well, I'll tell you that we are starting to see, and it's a well-documented fact, that every single one of the children in Gaza is going to suffer some form of psychological trauma, from being exposed to the death, the destruction, the poverty, the displacement, the hunger, the instability that they've had to endure over 4 months. Small children, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, they're not in school. There's no academic year at all in Gaza for any child. The schools are full of refugees, and they're just at the same time being educated by suffering, by violence. And the impact that has is that these kids will be scarred for the rest of their lives, that they will carry this burden of psychological trauma. And many of your listeners in your country understand that from the struggle that you went through several generations ago to liberate yourselves from the apartheid regime. But in Palestine, we have not only a continuation of apartheid, but we also have this extreme violence that's being impacted on the population there, that's being imposed upon them. The death and destruction is unimaginable. Even in modern history, we've never seen in any conflict anywhere in the world a enclosed population which cannot escape the violence they're being subjected to in Syria, in Iraq, in Ukraine, places that we all are aware of from modern conflicts. Those people could escape. It's not easy for them. I'm not trying to minimize the hardship and suffering of those people who went through those terrible tragedies, But in the Gaza Strip, there is no place for them to go. There is no open borders. They cannot escape the bombings every single night, which kill over 100 people every single night. So therefore, the trauma, the psychological trauma, is one that is nightmares. It's for these children. It's going to impact their growth and stunt their
Yeah.
development and cause them to be carrying these psychological wounds for the rest of their lives.
Um, an estimated 25,000 children have lost one or both parents in this war. Of course, the immediate call is for a ceasefire, water, medicine, humanitarian aid. Let's hope that a ceasefire is called soon, and then there can be some sort of normalization, whatever normalization is at the moment. But what about the counseling? What about the seeing to of the mental health of children? How do you even start a process of trying to heal 25,000 children who have lost one or both parents in the last 4 months?
This is a great question, Lester, and I think it's one that still remains unclear, and I'll tell you why. Of course, there is a science on mental health treatment and therapy for children from conflict areas. It's a not well developed, but it's certainly an industry within the field of mental health care and post-traumatic stress treatment. But when you're talking about the issue of Palestine, it's not post-traumatic stress. This is not a conflict that has ended and people need to be healed from it. It's an ongoing conflict and one in which these children continue to be exposed to the extreme levels of violence that we mentioned previously. And therefore, how does one go about healing a child who has not only, as you mentioned, lost a parent and maybe endured themselves physical injury or had seen firsthand the death of a relative or a friend or a parent, had their home destroyed, had lived with extreme hardship in a shelter that was inadequate for basic human existence, including hunger, including the lack of clean water, no toilets. How does one heal that child when the conflict is ongoing? It hasn't stopped, and it hasn't stopped for generations. This has been going on for since 1948, since 1967, since it's been just an ongoing source of trauma for the entire population. So how does one go about treating children as they are continuing to be exposed to these levels of violence and hardship? This is the challenge, I think, for any mental health specialist or any humanitarian organization to come in and try to heal the hearts and the minds and the anxiety and the suffering of these children from a post-traumatic stress point of view when the source of the conflict is ongoing and has not been removed. This is the challenge that we all face for these children.
And then, of course, the unintended consequences of this war, which the IDF says is the targeting of Hamas, is the radicalization of 25,000 plus children who may then go on to be radicalized, and then so continues the cycle of violence in the Middle East, Steve.
Well, I think it's more than 25,000. I would say that the entire population in Gaza has become, what they've experienced firsthand is going to be an extreme source of radicalization that the Israelis and the rest of the world have to take responsibility for and find a way to minimize, because that is not an easy future challenge for anyone to deal with. And I don't think it's just in Gaza. I think the entire Middle East is becoming radicalized as a result of being exposed to this genocide every single day on social media or from their own accounts and experiences, seeing dead children, dismembered children, parents digging in the rubble looking for their dead children, hungry kids begging for food, complete neighborhoods destroyed, the entire population being uprooted from their homes, and so on and so forth. And then you look at the other side and you see the radicalization and the hatred blocking aid from going into Gaza, citizens taking it upon themselves to go and block food into Gaza and to deny starving children access to food. And all it does is further radicalize the entire region. And, I have to say that the American government has to take responsibility and come up with some kind of peace plan right now that's going to not only call for a ceasefire and put an end to the immediate killing, but bring a comprehensive solution to the Palestinian issue once and for all. We all know what the solution is. Everyone does. Everybody in Israel, everybody in Palestine, everybody in the United States, in Europe, in South Africa, we all know that it has to be equality for the Palestinian people, political equality, where they are not secondhand citizens, as you experienced in your country generations ago, where people are being denied equality based on their ethnicity or their race or their religion, as it is in Palestine. Today, this has to stop. This is 2024. We don't live in this kind of world any longer, where you have two classes of citizens living on the same land and one controlling the other simply based on their ethnic or religion identity. That has to stop. And we all know that. Everyone knows that. So let's get to that solution already. Let's sit down and have that discussion. What does that look like? How is that going to work out? What can be done to bring about this end to this apartheid regime, this occupation, and the senseless killing of innocent people on all sides? We don't want Israelis to be hurt either. And the only way to put an end to this violence is to get rid of the root cause, which is the lack of equality and freedom for the Palestinian people.
Steve Sosebee, really appreciate your time. The founder of the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund, now the director of HEAL, Health, Education, Aid, and Leadership. Thanks so much for your time.